Hey guys, welcome to the Neglected Podcast. This podcast is not to change your mind, but to invite you into somebody else's narrative. This is a podcast to give a voice to the neglected. It is also an opportunity for all of us to engage.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Neglected Podcast. This is Nick Schultz. You can hit me up at Schultzy Time. We are For the Neglected here at City Church. Producer Quinn, what's going on, my man? Thanks for being here. And we have a very special guest, a returning guest.
That's right.
Matt Rogie. What's going on, man?
Not much, Nick. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing okay. We just went into a 10-minute deep dive of like our foster care experience currently.
Right.
And
yeah, appreciate you sharing that.
You're welcome.
I really do.
There's a lot of ups and downs, and I kind of vomited all on you because you're a good listener and you're someone that I can talk to about that kind of stuff. So I appreciate you listening. Mm-hmm. But you are not interviewing me today. I'm interviewing you, and we are going to be talking a little bit about some follow-up about what's going on with Afghanistan.
All right. Sounds good.
And you have a very unique history with being in the military, having some time over there, some circumstances that happened over there, whether good, bad, some stuff you can share, and really kind of what's been happening in our country, their country, and how that affects you and people that you try to also work with too, who have served over there. And that's part of your heart, is ministering to people that are first responders and people that have served. And this is a very unique time of people gave a lot for the things that happened over there from 9/11 on. And now we're back, but there's still stuff going on there, and it affects a lot of people in some unique and kind of hard ways. And so getting your perspective is really important, and I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And just in case anybody wants to know your full story, you were our guest for episode 8.
Okay.
Way back in the day.
That was before COVID?
That was before a lot of stuff.
Yes.
So if you want to hear Matt's full story about kind of growing up and the full life kind of stuff and what he's been through, episode 8 is the place to go.
Yep.
At least for this episode's purposes. We're going to pick it up with just explain to us kind of your tie to the military, to the war, Afghanistan, and kind of walk us through that connection.
Yeah, sure. Question though, how many other returning guests have you had? A couple, right?
Just one, I think.
One?
Yeah.
Okay. Just curious where I fit into that.
This is a big deal.
Big deal.
You're a big deal.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, so with that, I served for 22 years in the Army. Came in pretty much right after high school. Did 22 years. Very shortly after I came in, just a couple years, I came in as enlisted. I went to flight school, became a warrant officer, and then spent basically the next 20 years flying. About half that time was spent here in Savannah. We got stationed here in 1999 to the 160th SOAR Special Ops Unit, and of course, 2 years after that, 9/11 happened, and that began, like so many others, that cycle of deploying, and so I think I tried to do the math and figure out, because somebody asked me, like in total, how long did you spend like in Afghanistan? And probably I know I did 6 trips over there, and those are varying lengths. First one was like 9 months, and then after that, they got a little bit shorter each time. 3-4 months, something in that range. But
and you were married for all of them, and did your son too? Or?
Yeah.
So you had a family.
He was born in 97. So so they experienced that whole thing too. Out of that, like you sort of mentioned, there's good stuff, and there's pretty bad stuff, that happened over there. But and of course, now, with the current stuff going on and what happened in the news over the past, couple of weeks, it's been on a lot of people's thoughts.
Yeah. Well, let's start with just some of the good stuff, like your experience over there. And we went over there, 9/11 happened, we went to fight the Taliban and do our stuff over there. And what were some of the good things, either in a personal way or from a camaraderie standpoint, or good for the Afghani people that you saw? Like what was some of the positive stuff that you experienced?
I think the positive is that description. We were just, I was talking about it just last week, there was 5 of us that did a Zoom call. I think it was last Tuesday night. Basically just like, hey, these are guys that we served with on these first deployments, and spent a lot of time with. And we said, hey, let's just get a call together and Zoom and just share what's on our hearts right now. And the coolest thing about that is we picked right back up where we left off. I mean, some of them, I've talked to a couple times here and there, a couple times a year, but others you don't talk to for 4, 5, 6, 7 years. But it's just like you're picking back up right where you left off. And a lot of that had to do with the trust we had in each other, that camaraderie, that you mentioned, the commitment to each other. And so without a doubt, those relationships that we established with each other were by far the strongest relationships, short of, with Jesus and my wife, that I'd ever had at the time, which, wouldn't trade that for the world. Not one bit, despite some of the bad stuff. And I'd say, 2002, that first deployment, it was probably, out of all my time in service, that was probably the best year in some respects. One, because we were doing what we trained to do, and it was real. And we all felt very strongly that we were doing it for a reason. I mean, 9/11 just happened. So we were going over there to, basically get rid of Al-Qaeda, overthrow the Taliban who'd been harboring them. And so there was definitely a huge patriotic emotion going on there as well. Yeah. We called it was like the Wild Wild West in a lot of ways. It was before, the joke became the longer we stayed there is the more it became like a base back here in the United States, with military police giving out speeding tickets on the bases and generals running around and complaining that people aren't saluting them, and make sure your uniform's clean, that type of stuff. Which in the first year, probably for the first few years, it was just all about get the mission done.
And so what about some of the stuff that was difficult over there? And I know previous podcasts, at least you've shared about PTSD and an accident and some of that stuff. You can walk through people. I know there's like physical things that happen, but
right.
Just explain the physical stuff, but also kind of the mental stuff.
Yeah,
from being over there.
I think it took its toll. I mean, after doing these deployments multiple times, and usually our pace while we were on these deployments, it was very rapid. So there really wasn't a lot of downtime to ever process the previous night's mission. And especially as the war went on, and as we refined our techniques of how to actually do these missions, and same thing with our customers, the Rangers, the SEALs, the Green Berets, they refined their process too, so we could do things a lot quicker. And so instead of taking 96 hours to plan a mission, literally it got down to probably about 4 hours of like, hey, here's a bad guy, all right, 4 hours later, we're out the door taking the customers to this target. And you could do that maybe even multiple times in a night. And so with that, which that's just a physically and mentally taxing, but then you throw in the other things that come with that of being, in a very dangerous environment of, near misses, seeing people get, wounded, accidents, close calls, things like that. It just begins to take a toll, because you never have time to sit back and process and go, wow, man, we almost died when we barely missed that mountain the other night because we couldn't see it in this dust storm. And it just accumulates. You're just stacking more stuff on. I mean, with that, there were some major events for my times that I was over there, which I think would speak to a lot. I know without a doubt, people, hundreds of thousands have experienced similar things in these deployments of, losing your best friends, having to carry, their casket onto the plane to send them back home, with the flag draped over it. I was in an accident myself when I was over there. We ended up being on the ground for about 24 hours till we got picked up the next night. Thankfully everybody lived through that, but it was a pretty traumatic experience. And again, not a lot of time to process it in the moment, just because we still had a mission to get done. So I think, there's definitely a combination of the good and the bad. And and you talk about, like the Afghan people, I mean, and I know this, and I know that good has been done. Never really personally saw it, on an individual level, but, there were girls in Afghanistan now who were able to go to school for the first time. Learning how to read. There was freedom, more freedom than what they had before. I mean, there was still, it never was perfect, and again, we could go into a long conversation of whether we should try and make it like Little America or not, whether that's good or bad, which I would say is bad, but, from a culture standpoint. Mm-hmm. But again, there was just things to where, people were able to, I think, feel a little bit safer when we were over there. I mean, a lot of infrastructure was built there. And again, that's a hard question of whether it was really useful. Mm-hmm. And I say that not in a disparaging way, but, sometimes people are just happy with what they have. Mm-hmm. And, so if we bring them electric power and a cell phone, is that good or bad? Mm-hmm. If we're introducing these things to them and trying to, again, bring Western,
Yeah.
So, and again, that's I don't have a right answer for that one either. I have my opinions, mm-hmm. which in fact, have you ever seen the movie Full Metal Jacket?
No, sorry. Now I'm useless.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'll try and set the stage, but bottom line is there's a scene in the movie to where the two main characters, they're reporters in the Marines. They're basically correspondents, combat photographers, and they go to this, it's Vietnam War is where the setting is, and they go to this, it's like a mass grave to where the Viet Cong had basically executed a bunch of supposed sympathizers with the South Vietnamese Army and the Americans. And so these two combat photographers are taking some pictures, asking some questions, just, for the Stars and Stripes newspaper. And while they were there, they were confronted by this Marine colonel, this very maybe stereotypical by the book Marine colonel. Mm-hmm. And he says, one of the comments he makes is in his best patriotic, America first type thing. He goes, in the side of every Vietnamese is an American screaming to get out. And that's what we're here for. And I misquoted that, I'm sure, a little bit, but that's the gist of it. I wouldn't know. But that's the gist of it. And again, it's that attitude of, what we have, we can't assume that to always be the best for everybody around the world. Mm-hmm. Works pretty well, I think, but especially
You're used to it too, yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I'm used to it, you know. But they don't necessarily need a Taco Bell on every corner either.
Right.
As much as Taco Bell would like that.
Right, I'm sure they would. So you were very open about just kind of PTSD and the mental health side of it.
Yeah.
Of coming back, and it's not just specific because of Afghanistan. It's the war, and other people have it from other countries and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
And how that affected your relationship with your family, but also just kind of your purpose and coming back from that too. And I want to tie that in a little bit. You can share some of those experiences, but ultimately I want to tie that in of you're never over it necessarily. It's always something you battle, I'm sure. But how going through that, and once you explain that, does that get triggered more now with our decision of going out of Afghanistan and the Taliban coming back into power, or are you able to just kind of let that go? I know it's a complicated question, but there's still people over there. We still think there's Americans over there. There's interpreters and people that helped our U.S. military, helped you that were over there, and their families. And so they're still in danger, yet we're fully pulled out, which maybe is a good thing or a bad thing. And so troops are now safe. And how does all that work together with what you're going through right now, that previous experience and now with it coming back up like this?
Yeah. To be open and transparent, at first I was basically just sort of ignoring it. That was my defense mechanism. I'm just not going to watch the news. I'm not going to worry about it. But I began to have some one-on-one conversations with a couple of people I served with, and which then allowed sort of this opportunity for me to begin to process and think about it. And I would, so yeah, there's still this emotional connection there, and it doesn't bring up, and some of the things that I've dealt with, and I still deal with, in regards to some of the symptoms that come from post-traumatic stress. Thankfully, I think I've come a little ways from where I was, or even a long ways. But still, yeah, it definitely triggers it, because and again, some of the questions that people have asked, I've definitely asked, even though I know the answers, at least I think I do. Was it worth it?
Right.
To the families whose, sons, daughters, husbands, wives, spouses have been killed, was it worth it? If literally the day we pull out, we hand it right back to the same people that were in charge when we went in. And again, that's ultimately, because of my faith in Jesus, I do believe it was worth it, because, I've got at least secondhand stories of people who have heard the gospel because of us going into that country and maybe making a way for other people to bring the gospel and to share with people from Afghanistan, and just to have that opportunity, not to force it upon them, but to have that opportunity. So I think, so yeah, it's definitely been more of a stressor over the past few weeks. And I really have to just sort of watch where I let my mind go to, because I can easily see myself falling into this trap of anger, isolation, beating my chest with my fist, and just, this is wrong, look at me, claim, pull out the victim card. And I'm not saying that people who are making noise are doing that, but again, I know for me, that's what I would, this negative behavior that would allow me to go down to, which then affects everything else in my life, my relationship with my wife and, coworkers, friends at that point. So, so there's definitely, but at the same time, I don't believe that I'm supposed to completely just ignore what's going on either, because where God has placed me now, I can speak into other people's lives as well. And so I just sort of, I do need to pay attention to what's going on and not hide myself from, those images and those videos that were coming out, the horrible videos of that C-17 taxiing down the runway, and those with the Afghans holding on to it, and some holding on through takeoff, and then some getting crushed by the landing gear, and some falling from the sky. That is absolutely horrible. There's, that is just, to see people willing to do that, and then just as a human being, but especially as, somebody who has invested so much in that country, just personally, and to see those people and what they're doing, and then knowing, decisions are being made completely out of, the average Joe's control that allowed that to happen. When, and you just, I wanted to, I was starting to go to a different direction with that. But I think, and again, that's to where, some of my friends, really struggling with this. The week, not last week, but the week before that. So this is the week of, it was actually when some of the things were really starting to ramp up there at the airport. I was at Mighty Oaks program, and that was a program I went through March of 2020, right before COVID hit. And it's a 5-day intensive program for veterans and first responders. Primarily, it was developed for those, coming back from combat, post-traumatic stress, and basically how to help or to show you the gospel, and to show you, what your true identity can be, and it not rooted in something else. And so I'm there in this program now. I'm going through to become a trainer with them and to be a team leader with them. And so there were 17 participants going through. And to listen to these stories, and this was the same when I went through it actually as a participant a couple of years ago. These guys were literally seconds away from killing themselves. And a lot of those, just now, those emotions are being triggered, those emotions and thoughts and feelings are being brought back up again.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate it.
Yeah.
And so that causes me to want to say, all right, instead of ignoring this, I need to go, because thankfully I've received a lot of grace, a ton, more grace than I deserve, and I've been given some skills, some knowledge, and I think a fairly decent ability to listen and to, at a minimum, listen to people and to help them process that stuff. Because that's the last thing I want to see is, one more person taking their life because of something that they have no control over of.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering is, because I know a handful of people, but way more than I do that have been through this stuff, specifically with Afghanistan and the military, and not just the pullout and seeing everything. That's one thing, but then we got 9/11 coming up, 20th anniversary in less than 2 weeks.
Yep.
And that's a whole nother, triggering event of, it'd be one thing if everything happened successfully and we could all hug and like, hey, everything was perfect how we got out of here and it's perfect there and we can celebrate this, and it doesn't feel like that at all.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say it as a political statement, it's just that's what it is. I mean, it's a lot of hurt and mess out there right now and still people over there, and you're around people and you talk to them, and to me that was a concern of mine, of the people that are really in deep, dark places already and struggle with that, and how are they handling this situation now, but then what's coming up again. I don't want you to speak for anybody, but you're a little bit closer in those circles of like why that is so hard and how to help people in those situations.
Yeah. It's 9/11 will definitely be a downer this year. I mean, it is every year, but there's definitely not going to be a day to where it's like, And with that, I think, dates. I mean, dates are a constant thing. My friends and I, we talk about it. We have these dates ingrained in our memories of when things have happened. 99% of them bad. And there was an anniversary just this year on June 28th. That was when some friends of mine and many others, when the aircraft was shot down in Afghanistan, and we lost 16 people total on that aircraft. Plus, there was another 3 SEALs that were killed during an ambush. This year was probably the first year that I woke up, and it wasn't until like 10 in the morning. My wife's like, or maybe even that afternoon, she goes, "How you doing today?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I just thought it was like the normal, like, how you doing?"
Mm-hmm.
But hers was the one of love and concern, knowing what that day meant to me. And it really sort of took me, not that I had forgotten this event, nor forgotten the men that were lost and my friends, but it was like this first year that I was able to sort of, not put my identity in it, and still remember them and not, and so that was sort of good. But then, obviously now that's all been brought back to the front, 9/11. And so, I think to answer your question, with others, and there's a lot of people who are literally living day to day thinking about those moments and those bad things that have happened. And we see now with what happened with what our government, with the decisions they made. And I think a lot of veterans, especially those that served in Afghanistan, feel like they've been cast out, with what they did. So, and so for those guys, how do you help them? How do you, keep them from making a really dumb decision? And I think a lot of it's just, all right, let's talk, let's listen, but then I'm 100% sure that the only way through that is through the gospel. I mean, that's, I've probably been more convinced of that than anything else of being able to share Jesus and being able to share, where my hope lies, and not in a crazy street preacher standing on the milk crate and, fire and brimstone type stuff, but just of a man, we're just like, in a lot of ways, what Jesus experienced, or like what veterans are experiencing right now, that feeling of being cast out. Jesus was rejected by the majority, and he was, but the cool thing is we also know, from scripture, is that, we will never be cast out if we come to Jesus. And I think that brings this message of hope. Now, obviously not everybody is going to be receptive to that, but those that are willing to sit down and talk about it, I mean, that's something I want to go to right away, is just talk about their worth and where that stands. But I think, for most people, it's listening, and that can be really tough because as time goes on, when these mental issues aren't addressed, people can become more angry or more depressed. Other things can begin to surface from their past, childhood, and it creates this big mess. And sometimes those people are really hard to listen to, just because of negativity or, or just whatever. But trying to get them some help. I mean, that's what I love about the Mighty Oaks program, is the ability to, as long as somebody can get to one of their locations, or really, they don't even have to pay to get to their locations. They'll pay for their plane tickets and, to get there and to spend a week with other guys and to be able to process some of this stuff and then hear truth, 100% biblical truth. When I was at this one 2 weeks ago, again, one of the things that, even though we had this whole mess of Afghanistan going on while we were there, and we were all aware of it, I mean, we had cell phone coverage while we were there, but throughout that, you had these three guys. One was a 67-year-old Green Beret who did a lot of time in the early 80s, South America, Central America, narco wars, those types of things. You had a guy who was in the Iraq war right at the beginning during the invasion. And then you had a guy who's still active duty, Marine, lieutenant, infantry guy. And all, these three people, they gave their lives to Christ and were baptized that week. And now, and they were connected with a local church when they go back home. And so even despite all this other craziness, God's still at work. And that's where, for me, that's the only thing that's allowing me to function each day. Because again, if I can go, to really deep, dark places. There's been a couple times, I'm sure, over the past couple of weeks where I've just been, I just want to go home, get a 6-pack of beer on the way home and just, all right, and not necessarily to get hammered, but just dull the senses a little bit, help me sleep so I don't think about it. And again, I'm thankful that I've been given some skills and tools to where I don't have to go that direction.
Yeah. What is the hardest or some of the hardest parts about what is happening now or what has happened recently? And, I'll just throw some of the things out there and you can either go that direction or maybe it'll trigger some ideas. But, you got the previous experience in Afghanistan of what you've went through and the PTSD and losing people and just you being over there personally multiple times and how it's affected you and your whole life, really, and your family. And what we've done, I mean, is there some of it that's just even tactically, like how we did it? Like it could have been done this way or done better, or we left equipment over there, or we didn't do this when we should have. Like, do those things bother you more of like, okay, I can set aside us being out, but the way these things happen, that's really hurtful, or the certain people that are left there, we didn't do that right. And I know there's a lot of different things, but are there certain things that are harder for you to kind of deal with or burn you the most about what's going on?
Yeah. I think it's the people that are still there, whether they want to get out or not. I thought back to, I think it was in 1991 after the Iraq War, when there was a large effort, encouragement by the United States government for the Kurds to rise up against the Iraqi government in northern Iraq. And then at some point, some decisions were made, and, America just sort of moonwalked backwards and, left the Kurds there holding the bag, and Saddam came in there and, wanted to wipe him out, and I felt that this was sort of the similar thing. And again, and so, seeing people suffer in the injustice, and a lot of it comes because of racial prejudice. Whether somebody's going to say it or not, I'll say it. Why didn't we go into Rwanda?
Mm-hmm.
There's no strategic benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Some people could argue that Afghanistan does have some strategic benefit because its proximity to Russia and China, but, but I mean, we sent these people right back to being under this horrific, evil government, the Taliban. I mean, there's nothing redeeming about that government whatsoever. They've already outlawed music, and so I was just reading that they just executed some folk singer, because he played music. Would he still be alive if we were there? Probably. I don't know. I mean, the Taliban still existed, but, and again, that's where I probably struggle the most, Nick, is this idea of, and again, what's the point? Is it world police? Are we the world police, or do we just button up, close off our borders and just not worry about the world? Unfortunately, it's, you can't do either one. Mm-hmm. And again, I don't, and that's where it'd be awesome to save everybody and to save these, these families who, I think it was maybe a couple weeks ago, but the Taliban were in Kabul and they just started indiscriminately firing their weapons. And you could see these, sort of the aftermath of that, the pictures of the bodies. And again, there's no justice in that. And and just to blindly say, okay, we're done. And again, what's the right answer though? Mm-hmm. Should we have kept people there forever? And more lives get lost? American lives, that's, that's hard to, I don't know what the right answer is on that. Yeah. But I think that's probably one of the biggest things. It's that injustice that we see happening and just going, is there another way? Could we do this differently? A lot of people said that we should not have closed down Bagram Air Base, which was north of Kabul, because huge air base that we controlled, and that's where the evacuation efforts should have been funneled out of. And, ultimately, you're still going to get to a point to where you've got a very small footprint, and the crowds are going to be coming, and I think, whether that happened in Kabul or Bagram or somewhere else, I think it was inevitable, because I don't think the Air Force could have gone in and just started bombing everybody in Kabul, because a lot of civilians as well, if they wanted to keep them away. And maybe, so, even as I process it now, it's frustration, it's anger at the world, at the system, that again, that there's evil, and, sometimes, to the best of our abilities, evil's still gonna, temporarily at least, come out on top,
Well, I think that's why it was important for me to get someone's perspective, and especially yours, which I was appreciative of you saying yes to come in and do it, because it's still raw right now. And I think sometimes it's really good to interview people when it's farther down the line and you have time to process stuff, and it's maybe more facts come out, and maybe hindsight is a little more helpful and stuff like that. But I also think everybody is so raw in their emotions with so much going on right now, between COVID and masks and hurricane and Afghanistan, and you got wildfires out here, and like it's just feels like the world is burning all around us and people are upset about everything. So I do think it's good to have a perspective of this is coming up, 9/11 is coming up, and hopefully we're going to be airing this right around that time.
Initiate that by, if you know somebody who served over there, been affected by that, and maybe, or it could be a family member that's lost somebody over there, of saying, hey, acknowledge that 9/11's coming up, acknowledge that, this Afghanistan pullout hasn't been the best, regardless of what your opinions are about it or not. And then say, hey, tell me a story about when you were there, or what's something that, that sticks out to you most about all your trips over there, or your deployment. Where were you at in country? Just allowing them to share part of their story, because part of their story is what's causing them to have pain. Mm-hmm. Sadness, anger, grief, rage, those types of things. And so allow them a chance to voice that story to somebody and listen to them. Don't use it as an opportunity to stand on a political soapbox, or at the same time not to put them on a pedestal of this heroic thing. Granted, there is a lot of heroic things that have happened over there, but just taking an opportunity and just letting them talk, and to listen, and just and acknowledge that you're listening to them. And I think a lot of us, we tend to hear, veterans will hear, people will say things like, thank you for your service. Mm-hmm. Or if you begin to tell stories, if you begin to sort of open up about maybe some of the things that you're struggling with, a lot of people's responses will be something to the effect of like, wow, that's really bad. I'm glad it wasn't me, or I don't know how to deal with that, or, and I'm talking about like professionals. I mean, like pastors, and again, it's a normal response, but at the same, I can understand somebody saying that, but at the same time, you need to have I think more of empathy and of just sitting there and just acknowledging the fact, I can see why you're upset about this, or why this anniversary is this, but hey, I love you.
Yeah. Let's try to do a little bit more than thank you for your service. Try to do a little bit more than I'm glad it was you, not me.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's a great challenge, and I hope people will do that during this time of, this thing is going to be a raw time. I don't think we really even fully understand it yet because of the stuff that's happening in Afghanistan. Like, this 20th anniversary is going to be a kind of raw emotional thing, and we don't need everybody's opinion on everything about it, but just a lot more empathy that for the people that have sacrificed a lot and that it affects the most. And so hope I can do that as well and lead that charge a little bit too. And I appreciate your advice on that, because that's definitely a good challenge for me personally too, to do that to others as well. And I appreciate you coming on the podcast and being willing to share during all this stuff. And I know you're a processing kind of guy, so am I. And sometimes it's a little nervy and raw for us to be asked questions in a live thing like this when you haven't really been able to think it all the way through, really, and know how you feel about everything too. But I do think it was important to explore that, because there's a lot of people around us that are going through that right now. Instead of waiting until they have it all figured out and it's safe to enter their space, this is the time to enter that space when it is like that. And so people don't go to a darker place where they know they're loved and aren't isolated. So I appreciate the time, appreciate your friendship, and
same, Nick.
Really glad you were here. Quinn, appreciate you producing, and man, looking forward to it, and appreciate your service and you as a friend and a person.
Thanks, Nick. Glad to be here.
Yeah, no problem. We're at For the Neglected. You can hit us up at #ForTheNeglected, and we'll catch y'all later. Peace.